there, it's Trisha. Welcome back to my channel. I am just grabbing my Archer and Olive notebook here, about to sit down and plan out the month of March. I'm just giving you a little flip through of some previous pages. I've got a couple blank ones in there that I'm just doodling with. But I've got my weeklies. I'm leaving one more page for the last week of February, and then I'm ready to start March. So my plan is to use this beautiful layered stamp set from Altenew. It has a lily image and a leaf image. And then I'm going to use the rest of the real estate on the page for the grid for the monthly calendar. So I've got a couple big pieces of Post-it tape here, and I'm going to use these to create masks because I want to layer my images, my floral images, to create a little cluster. So I was just making sure that this is going to fit. That's the wide, I believe it's 2-inch Post-it tape. So I'm going to just stamp it on the Post-it tape. I do make sure that it gets good and dry because it tends to smear. If you have ink, like masking paper, I don't think it smears quite as much, but this works just fine. Just kind of have to let it dry and be careful with it. So after I stamp those out, I'm going to fussy cut the images, and I'm just very careful to stay right on or even a tiny bit inside of my lines because I don't want to create a little white halo around my images when I stamp the next like neighboring stamp. So I have a couple of leaves, and the main, all I did was stamp the solid most floral image because all the other detail images land within that. So I just picked the most solid one, and I'm using that as my mask. So now I'm ready to get stamping in my notebook. Again, this is my Archer and Olive dot grid notebook. And this image has 3 main layers plus that center piece that looks like a little crown or like a patch of grass. Usually people start with like that big solid layer, but with this one, I find it easier to line up if I start with the second layer and then put the solid one over the top. So that's what I'm going to do here. I have the second layer on the block that is sitting on my notebook right now. And I am grabbing this ink cube. This is Flirty Flamingo ink from Stampin' Up! And I'm going to ink up my image really well, make sure I've got a lot of good coverage. And I'm going to stamp that up in the corner, left-hand corner of my page. And I do have a block under the left side of my book because that helps to keep it flat while it's laying open so that the page doesn't bend down on an angle and it supports it while I get a good impression. So now I'm taking Cotton Candy Hybrid ink. This is a Simon Says stamp ink. And I'm going to put this layer right over the top. So this is the more solid layer, and you can see it's lighter and it fills in the background. But for me, I just find it easier to line up. You can just play around with this if you have similar layering stamp sets and just see what works best for you. My third layer here is Regal Rose from Stampin' Up! And I'm adding that, and you can see already the dimension that gets built up. And then my center is Strawberry Slush from Stampin' Up! And I had to cut out the parts where my head gets in the frame because when you're using these layering stamp sets, you really do need to look straight down over the top of them to get the best alignment. And then I find that they're really pretty easy to layer up. I also want to mention that even with 4 layers of dye ink, I still did not get any bleed through to the opposite pages in this Archer and Olive notebook, which is super impressive. I loved that. So now I'm starting on my next flower. This is Soft Cantaloupe from Hero Arts. And again, that's sort of the second or middle layer of my flower. And then I'll go back to a lighter color, and I'm going to use that same base color. It's Cotton Candy from Simon Says Stamp. And I'm just going where the other one was a little bit more pink. These are just a little bit more orangey coral colors. So my third color here is called Calypso Coral. It's a Simon Says Stamp color, and this will be my more detailed image for the petals. And again, line those up right on top, and you can see how beautiful that turns out. The contrast between these colors is pretty stark when you first stamp them, but as they blend into the paper over time, you'll see they gel right in there. So I didn't edit out that one little piece where you see my head get in the way. That is really how you have to do it in order to line these babies up. Okay, I am using chocolate chip ink, and there is one more stamp image to finish off these flowers, and it is the stamen that go in the center, and then I'm ready for my leaves. So I'm going to start my leaves with lime green from Hero Arts, which is a really beautiful bright green color. I'm using that as my base layer. And this one I am sort of doing in that order. I'm doing the solid layer first, then the middle layer, then the detail. So I'm creating a little cluster of 3 leaves here. And by masking off that flower, it'll look like the leaves are behind my floral image. So yes, that is a Hero Arts ink. Then I'm going to Lucky Limeade, which is an older color of Stampin' Up. But again, just play around with whatever ink combinations you have in your stash and you'll come up with some. I actually made a cheat sheet of combinations that layer nicely together. So I use that as a guide when I want to create little floral clusters. So I'm using Old Olive ink from Stampin' Up! For that top detail layer of those leaves. And you can see I'll carefully pull that back, this mask. I try not to tear it because I'll reuse this as many times as possible throughout this project and even for future projects until it totally loses its stick. But you can save the masks. So I'm grabbing that stamen image again and the chocolate chip ink, and I'm putting the center in for that flower, and they're just so pretty. Altenew stamps just are, I think, some of the most beautiful images. The way that you get depth and dimension just from stamping, and they really make it kind of foolproof, make you look like an artist when you're not one, or at least when I'm not one. So now I want to create a yellow flower, and I'm going to do this layered over the flower on the right hand side of the page. I'm using some second generation stamping for this one. I didn't have a yellow that went along with this the way I wanted, so I'm doing So Saffron ink from Stampin' Up! As that middle layer. And then for the base layer, this solid one, I'm stamping off onto scratch paper with the same color, with So Saffron, and then going right over the top. That was not quite dark enough, so I just repeated the exact same process a second time. And that's the color I was looking for. It's a very pale yellow in the background, but it's exactly what I wanted. So now I'm inking up that detail layer with Butter Bar ink from Hero Arts, and that will give me that extra layer of dimension and depth to the flower, and it looks just beautiful. I love it. And then I'll choose another Stampin' Up! Ink, Wild Honey. Oh, excuse me, Hello Honey, it's called. And that will be my center of my flower. So that tiny little thing that looks like a sprig of grass or like a crown maybe, that goes right in the pit of the flower there. And then I'll do the same thing with the chocolate chip ink to add the stamen. And now my florals are done, so I just want to add some leaves to that cluster on the bottom right. So this, this page is coming together super quickly because these stamp sets just make it do the work for you. It just already has this beautiful look to it. I love the color combinations. It feels bright and springy for March, which probably will still be cold here in Michigan, but that's okay. I'm really looking forward to spring. I'm willing it to happen. So I just sort of tweaked my mask to make sure that it looked pretty good. And now I'm going to add some leaf images. I am also using those leaf masks that I created because there's a few places where I will overlap on the leaves as well. And again, I'm just using that same green color combination of the lime green, the Lucky Limeade, and the Old Olive, and using the 3 layers there. And then I will shift my floral mask down to the yellow flower so that I can add some on the other side. And look at how pretty those look. And like I said a minute ago, the ink, as it blends into the paper and the different layers of ink absorb into each other, these flowers even kind of take on a more realistic and more mellow look. And I just love I love the end result. I think they're just beautiful. So I've added a leaf down on the lower left of that cluster, and then I decided that I want a leaf in the center. Oh, I guess I had two. No, I wanted it right there in the center. And I didn't have a second floral mask, so I'm just kind of making do with what I have. And I'm using two of the leaf masks to just cover up that one petal so that I can get a leaf down there in the corner. And that worked out just fine. I could have taken the time to cut a second floral mask, but I was almost to the end of this project and I thought I'd just make do with what I have. And again, I will save all of those. I peel them up carefully, try not to tear them. And this low tack tape works just great. You can use a full stick post-it note, you can use the post-it tape on a roll like I have, or you can get masking paper for this. And then what I do to store them is I just stick them on the back paper of the stamp set and just keep it right with my set so that anytime I go to use it, I already have it made. So now I'm just going to use my black pigment liner to create the grid for the March calendar. And each of the days in my calendar has 6 boxes vertically and 5 boxes across. For some highlights on those stamen, I'm using a metallic gold pen, and it just puts a little bit of brightness in the center of those flowers and adds a little highlight, but you still have the definition from that chocolate ink, so it looks really nice. I like how that turned out a lot. For the title, I want to put March up there at the top so that I know what month I'm on. And I'm using these waffle flower stamps, which I've used in a previous video recently. I think it's called Cutaway Alpha. And I'm just going back to one of those yellow colors, that butter bar. It's one of the same colors that I used in that flower. And I always start with the center letter, so I'm stamping the R first, and then I will use the rest of the letters to finish the title. And I like how that looks. That alphabet just fit in nicely right there. I have a little swatch on the back of my book of all of my markers and mild liners, and I used that to help me pick this vermilion mild liner, and I'm just sort of checking to make sure it goes with my ink colors, and I love how that looks. So I'm going to swipe that across the top of each of these rows, and that'll give me first of all, it adds another little pop of color onto the page, and it gives me a place to write in the dates for each page. And I think it makes the grid look pretty. It adds a little bit more interest to the calendar. So I'm going to grab this Making a List stamp set from Tailored Expressions because I want to use that goals stamp over on the right hand side. So I will add a few gray lines with another mild liner just to give myself a little place to write down some things I want to focus on during the month of March. So I have a little bit of black and white polka dot washi. I wanted to add just another little something, but I didn't want to distract from my focal point elements, those florals. So I'm just putting a little bit of that on the lower left and the top right, and it just gives a nice subtle touch. Just that tiny little polka dot. And then I will finish it off by writing in my days of the week. Because I stamped March above the grid up there, I'm going to write Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday below the grid in each of those spaces, and then the Friday, Saturday, Sunday I will do above. And I don't mind when things get mixed up like that. I think it just, again, adds a little interest to the page. Doesn't bother me at all. It worked out just fine. So that finishes off my monthly spread just for my month at a glance look here in my bullet journal. Here's a little closer look at these florals, which I think are just gorgeous, and then I'll give you a still shot at the end. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this monthly setup, and I will see you next time.